This market, despite all the venture capital, despite the tax credits, despite the funding, China dumped panels and captured a major piece of the market. In wind, we're only 10% market share now. So you can mandate solar and wind, but they won't be made here. What's interesting about Virginia is we don't have any PV panel makers. We don't make wind turbines here. We don't install too many wind turbines here. And the solar index is mediocre. We have nuclear companies in the room. What's not often talked about on wind is you need 5,000 megawatts of wind to equal a nuclear power plant because of the capacity factor. Engineers in the room understand that. But if you look at wind, there's only 3 states with wind equivalent to 1 nuclear plant. California, Texas, and Iowa. And in addition to that, you have this geographic disparity. There's very little in the Southeastern Conference. And most of the wind is west of the Mississippi. The reactors, which we could replace, is east of the Mississippi. So you have a geographic separation. The conflict is occurring in the Mideast here, where wind is starting to displace some solar, and it's creating a problem for some of the operating reactors. In fact, wind has already topped out now because the tax credits have expired. So what are we going to do for an encore? I submit nuclear is part of that, and this is the reason why. Look at these major cities, back to the graphics I showed earlier. How are you going to power these? It's not going to be with wind and solar at night. China and India are building these. Turkey is building these because they want reliable power. In fact, in Asia, this is the rundown of the mega cities, and this is the #1 driver for nuclear energy going forward in our lifetimes. Major cities. So we just have to get used to that in terms of marketing. In addition to that, in addition to the current urban load, you have 2 billion more people moving to cities in the next 20, 30 years. 2 billion people. That's a market. In addition to that, they're moving to cities where you don't have this land area. We take it for granted in the United States. Here's Washington, D.C., 177 square kilometers. To equal, this is what the UK did, to equal their Hinkley Point C reactor plant that they're proposing to build, this is how much land area you need. They don't have it. Neither does the coast of India. China. Look at the wide open spaces in the United States of America. We take this for granted. The other thing that we've lost track of is pace. Look at the pace of development, just Shanghai and Dubai between 1990 and 2010. Staggering. We have never experienced this. They are. Here's another example. So not just cities, but this is the world's largest automobile factory in the eastern coast of Korea. It's Hyundai. They make solar panels. So they put solar panels on their roofs, about 30 megawatts. But how do they run the plant? They have 6 nuclear reactors around the corner up the coast. 4,500 megawatts. So the Koreans have got it. They understand. This is how you power high-tech advanced industry, not just cities. So here's the population curve and why you're seeing more reactors in Asia. 50 million people a year being added to the landscape. All right, so what's going on in the landscape? Putin, as one example, is the vice president of marketing for nuclear power for Russia. He gets off the plane and he sells a reactor to this man. In fact, he sold 10, right, Dr. Manini?
Yep.
How do we compete with that?
That's where the lunch goes.
Where's Marshall? How do you compete with that?
Take a while to answer. He also sold to the Jordanians.
Yeah, and here he is in Egypt, right? With El-Sisi. This was Turkey, here's Egypt. This was after the Ukraine incident. Still selling. Yeah, Dr. Mindy.
This is what Atoms for Peace is supposed to stop.
Yeah.
See where we are.
1953, yeah, right.
That is the idea. We want to lead the world, but we gave up.
So, you know, Russia's, what did you say, they're eating our lunch?
Yeah. Chinese are going to eat our dinners now.
Yeah. So this is how they see the racket. The P5 countries are still in a dominant role, but you can see where China and Russia are jumping ahead. In addition to that, what we face is the nuclear cliff, since the cliff metaphor seems to be popular now. This is what happens to our nuclear fleet if we do nothing. Now, David, if we extend to 80 years, this curve will shift out, but we still face a problem. What are we going to build? And so the challenge is, this is where we are, this is where the rest of the world is going. So the BRICS have taken the lead, specifically China, Russia, and India. So by 2030, we're no longer going to have the standing that we do now, which means we need to make the investments in universities and training now, not in 2030. What's interesting is China is now going to make $100 billion of investment in reinstituting the Silk Road. They're going to develop this entire region. And so what the State Department people found out is that this was a red light going off in the State Department. This is Mackinder revisited relative to global domination. If China and Russia seize the heartland of the world, this is Mackinder, who put forward this theory. All foreign ministries are versed in Mackinder. He is gospel for State Departments and global geopolitics. The relevance for nuclear is if Russia and China seize the heartland and they dominate access to 70% of the world's fossil resources, then the United States is on the periphery. And that's how these people think strategically. Yes, they've got some shortcomings, but they at least think strategically. And so last month, they all got together and formed a bank, capitalized with $100 billion. We're closing the Exim Bank. They're financing a bank to take that territory to the tune of $100 billion. World Bank is worried about financing nuclear. This bank will see nuclear as a primary sector to invest in for that entire global heartland and their own countries. It's embarrassing to see what we're doing. And so even the Pentagon gets involved because, and China and Russia listen to this, because after Mackinder, the Pentagon got religion on the threats from 9/11 coming from this non-integrating zone of the world, while the developed countries basically form the functioning core. So what China and Russia are going to do, they're going to develop this part of the world and push development to contain the non-integrating zone. And they're going to do that with this kind of international investment that we've outlined. And this shows how energy consumption per capita is a bellwether for destabilized, failed states. So geopolitically, there's a real role here for energy and reliable power for cities in terms of geopolitical stability. That's how Russia and China see it. You know, we're kind of stuck in our quarterly mentality. We don't see it on this scale. So for those of you that are in sales, this is the sales map for nuclear going forward for the next 20 years. Look at the blue urban cores. Those are cities, urban areas that are going to need nuclear power. And so there are some counter threats, fortunately. Abe has taken the VP of marketing role for Japan, and we're hitched to that wagon because of Toshiba, Westinghouse, GE, Hitachi. And he captured the other plant in Turkey on the Black Sea side, while the Russians got the one on the Mediterranean. He was active in Vietnam and getting a couple of reactors there, offsetting a Russian touchdown in Vietnam. This was fascinating. This is the president of South Korea. Now, how many of you are engineers that have had to sign off on equipment? What's she doing? She's signing for the nation of Korea on this reactor vessel. Not just a company. Yes, the president of KEPCO and Doosan are there. But she's signing the reactor for the nation of Korea to back it up. With the Crown Prince of UAE. Big stroke. Nations selling to sovereigns. That's the model. Here's our president, President Obama, meeting with Xi Jinping. Joint announcement on climate change last November. Nuclear is mentioned, not a primary focus. Same thing here in India. Now, Dr. Manini, correct me, but because we don't have a cooperation agreement between Japan and India yet, it hinders what we can market into India. So that's a political constraint on a market phenomenon. Because you can never get away from government if you're in the nuclear landscape. Government and industry work hand in hand in nuclear. Nuclear is different. And so I'll start to wrap up, Don. This is what we have an opportunity, I think, to affect. Senator Alexander will hold a hearing entitled USA Without Nuclear Power. We should provide, this group should provide, documents into that hearing. This is an opportunity because Senator Alexander wants the Southeast region, wants the United States to maintain its leadership in nuclear power. So Virginia should raise its hand and provide briefing like the workforce document, like the commitment to nuclear energy from the industries in this state, that a USA without nuclear power is inconceivable. Not just for our own power and reliability needs, but for our standing in the world and the role of nuclear power in the world. When I talk to Tea Party members with that equation, they get it. You can get half the Tea Party with that argument. Reliability, national security. Can't get all of them, don't need all of them. Again, just get the 60% in the middle. It's enough, politically. All right. Here's what I want to, I'll breeze through this. So here's the national nuclear energy strategies that we've identified. And here's the countries that they're doing, that are executing these. So I mentioned the three strategies. Supply side excellence versus demand side factors driving where nuclear power goes forward. So these are the countries that are engaged in rollback. These are the countries that are engaged in restructuring, including the USA. These are the countries that are engaged in renaissance. Full-blown, build reactors not only in our own country, but export. Because they're committed to supply-side excellence, including universities and workforce, national labs, the fuel cycle. But these countries in particular also face large demand. They have both drivers, supply and demand. So the wannabes down here, they don't have the supply side infrastructure. They're rated lower. They have to import. These countries have to import. These countries will import and export. These countries have to export. So that's part of our strategy, Don, is we have to be export-minded. We have to be competitive, and we're going to have to embrace innovative technologies, I think, to get there and dodge the low-cost provider problem of Russia and China. We have to offer a better value proposition. David, please.
Yeah, it could be just me, I'm the only one in the room, but P5,
Oh,
population 5,
no. USA,
yeah.
UK, France, China, Russia. The permanent members of the UN Security Council.